This aircraft leaks fuel on the runway. Its panels don't fit. At operating temperature, it grows several inches in every direction. And the titanium holding it together was purchased from the Soviet Union, the country it was designed to spy on. None of that is a flaw. Everyone is a deliberate engineering decision. The SR-71 Blackbird. Mach 3.2, 2,193 miles per hour. A speed record set in 1976 that nobody has matched in 50 years. But here's what most people get wrong. They think the engine made it fast. At cruise, the J58 engine core produced 17.6% of total thrust. The inlet delivered 54%. The nozzle added 28%. The most famous jet engine in history was the least important part of its own propulsion system. Pratt & Whitney built arguably the most famous jet engine in history. At cruise speed, it contributed less thrust than a favorable wind. That's not an engine. That's a chaperone. The real story of the SR-71 isn't one breakthrough. It's a dozen impossible problems solved by Kelly Johnson's Skunk Works with tools that would embarrass a modern high school physics lab. And when the most critical system failed, the plane tore itself apart. We'll get to that. First impossible problem. How do you sustain Mach 3 for hours? At 3 times the speed of sound, air hits the engine at 2,200 miles per hour. No compressor blade survives that. So before the air reaches the engine, you slow it down and compress it. That's the inlet's job. Inside each nacelle, a conical titanium spike translated 26 inches backward as speed increased. It positioned shockwaves inside the inlet. Supersonic air hit the spike tip, generated an oblique shock, and that shock bounced between the walls, compressing and decelerating the air with each reflection. By the time it reached the engine face, Mach 3.2 airflow had been slowed to subsonic and compressed to 40 times ambient pressure. The inlet did the compressor's job before the compressor touched the air. Above Mach 2, the engine pulled another trick. 6 bypass tubes bled 20% of compressor air straight into the afterburner, skipping the turbine entirely. The J58 stopped being a turbojet and became something closer to a ramjet, where forward motion compresses the air and fuel is just the heat source. The spike moved 26 inches based on speed, off by a fraction, and the shockwave blows out the front of the engine like a sneeze through a straw. Lockheed solved this with an air inlet computer that, by modern standards, had the processing power of a greeting card. Behind the engine, the ejector nozzle mixed exhaust with bypass air for another 28.4% of thrust. The inlet compressed the air. The bypass tubes rerotated it. The nozzle expanded it. The engine core was the match inside a furnace somebody else built. But Mach 3 doesn't just break engines. It breaks everything. The airframe, the fuel, the supply chain, and sometimes the crew. If the spike was wrong or the bypass doors too slow, pressure would build until the shockwave blew forward out of the nacelle. An inlet unstart. One engine at full power, the other at zero. The asymmetric force slams the aircraft sideways so hard that helmets crack against canopy glass. You have 2 seconds. January 25th, 1966. Test pilot Bill Weaver and specialist Jim Zweyer. Mach 3.18, 78,000 feet. The right inlet unstarted. Weaver slammed the stick, full left. Nothing. The aircraft departed, controlled flight, and disintegrated. Weaver never pulled the ejection handle. The breakup forces ripped him from the cockpit. His pressure suit inflated automatically, preventing his blood from boiling at altitude. He regained consciousness in freefall, confirmed his chute had deployed, and rode it into the New Mexico desert. Jim Zweyer did not survive, the only crew member lost in the entire program. 2 weeks later, Weaver was back in a Blackbird. The inlet wasn't the only impossible trade-off. At Mach 3, friction heats leading edges past 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The airframe expands inches. No 1960s sealant survived the thermal cycling, so Lockheed built the panels loose and let the fuel weep. JP-7 has a flashpoint so high you could throw a lit match into a barrel of it and the match would go out. The Air Force built a plane that leaks fuel the way a Labrador drips water after a bath. and then made the fuel so stubborn it refuses to catch fire out of spite, like a birthday cake candle. Takeoff light, tanker immediately, accelerate. The airframe heats, expands, seals itself. An aircraft that grows into its own skin at 3 times the speed of sound. That skin, 92% titanium. The only material with the strength-to-weight ratio to survive the heat. And in the 1960s, the biggest supplier of titanium ore was the Soviet Union. The CIA set up shell companies and fake export orders. The cover story reportedly included pizza ovens. The Soviets sold the raw material that built the plane designed to photograph their military installations and never asked a follow-up question. Espionage is a customer service industry. Did it all work? Between 1977 and 1988, the SR-71 flew 322 Baltic Express sorties. Swedish Viggen pilots scrambled every time. At Mach 2.1, a tail chase was impossible, so they fed ground radar into their fire control computers and set up head-on intercepts at a combined closing speed of Mach 5. 51 missile locks out of 322 sorties, 16%, and only when the Blackbird held course. The moment it turned, the geometry collapsed. If you're seeing a plane you thought you knew in a different light, consider subscribing. March 6, 1990, Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. 64 minutes, 20 seconds. 2,145 miles per hour. The Blackbird's final flight. It landed at Dulles, rolled into a museum, and never flew again. It wasn't retired because it failed. Over 4,000 missiles were fired at SR-71s during operational sorties. Not one connected. It was retired because the world made a bet. Satellites watch longer. Drones loiter cheaper. Digital sensors transmit in real time. The world decided persistence beats speed. That logic held for decades. Then, adversaries developed anti-satellite weapons. GPS jamming became standard. Drones proved vulnerable to electronic warfare and modern air defenses. We retired the fastest air-breathing aircraft ever built, replaced it with satellites and drones, and spent the next 2 decades watching adversaries develop the exact tools needed to neutralize satellites and drones. Strategic planning at its most moisture-compromised. The SR-72 has been a concept for over a decade. No nation on Earth operates a manned aircraft capable of sustained Mach 3. The engineering Kelly Johnson's team solved with slide rules and titanium in the 1960s has not been replicated with supercomputers and composites 60 years later. The SR-71 didn't become obsolete. The world decided it didn't need what the Blackbird offered, and slowly, it's starting to wonder if that was the right call. If a peer conflict breaks out tomorrow, and your satellites go dark in the first hour, what fills the gap? Something that exists, or something we have to reinvent? Drop your answer below. Go check out one of our other videos. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Until the next one, over and out.